Good morning,
Morning.
everyone. Thanks, bro. Appreciate that. I really do. Good to see everyone out right now. Take a seat anywhere it is. You're fine. Anyway, so it's good to see y'all. We're going to put a word of prayer. We're going to get started. Dear God, thank you for this time we come together and our worship. Father, be with us as we do the thing up here. And Lord, be glorified. Thank you for this church and the blessings that it brings forth. God, it's amazing. So we want to glorify you, God, because you have given us life and breath to do so. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, my peoples. Stand on your feet. I'm here to be with you. Come and be with me. I'm here to find you. Reveal yourself to me. I'm here to be with you. Come and be with me. I'm here to find you. Reveal yourself to me. As I wait, you make me strong. As I long, draw me to your arms. As I stand and sing your praise, you come and fill this place. Won't you come and fill this place? I'm here to be with you. Come and be with me. I'm here to find you. Reveal yourself to me. As I wait, you make me strong. As I long, draw me to your arms. As I stand and sing your praise, you come and fill this place. As I wait, you make me strong. As I long, draw me to your arms. As I stand and sing your praise, you come and fill this place. Won't you come and fill this place? Give me that note back. I see that note. There we go. Who are we that you would be mindful of us? What do you see that's worth looking our way? We are free in ways that we never should be. Sweet release from the grips of these chains. Light can just strain them from the weight. My heart can no longer keep from singing. All that is within me cries for you alone. Be glorified, Emmanuel. God with us. Heart sings a brand new song. Dead is paid, shame gone, Emmanuel. God with us. Move mountain, let the mountains move. We come with expectations, waiting here for you. Waiting here for you. You're the Lord of all creation. Still you know my heart. The author of salvation. You love us from the start. Waiting here for you. With our hands lifted high in praise, and it's you we adore, singing hallelujah. Waiting here for you. You are everything you promise. Your faithfulness is true. As before your presence, all we need is you. Waiting here for you. With our hands lifted high in praise, and it is you we adore, singing hallelujah. Waiting here for you. With our hands lifted high in praise, and it's you we adore, singing hallelujah. Be seated.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
We have a couple of announcements. This is our last week for our small groups. So I believe the women's group are going to meet a half an hour later. They're going to meet at 7:30 tomorrow night at Andrew Naslin's. And then on Tuesday, we're going to meet at scheduled at 7 o'clock at Dion's place as well. And then also the first Sunday of December, which I think is the 7th, we're going to have a Christmas decorating party here. So feel free to come and hang out afterwards, decorate the place for Christmas, and I'm sure there'll be a sign-up sheet there pretty shortly for food, etc. So that's happening here at the Journey. Today what I want to talk about is kind of based off of our small group experience over the last several weeks. And you know, one of the things that we've been talking about in our small group experience is what does it mean to be a disciple? And way that Andy Stanley had presented it in this group was saying that there's a core difference between being a Christian and being a disciple. And the reason for that is that it can seem a little bit like semantics, but at the end of the day, like when you look at scripture, the word Christian is actually only used 3 times in the New Testament, and the disciples never referred to themselves as Christian. It was always kind of something that outside people referred to them as, and sometimes it was most of the time like in a derogatory fashion. And even today, the word Christian has so many like hang-ups to it. Like because of the way that we've branded ourselves over the last several years, like Christian means so many different things to so many different people, it's probably lost its meaning. But the word disciple, when you think of the word disciple and discipleship, and you look at the New Testament, you can't help but see that it has a very clear definition and a very clear idea of what it means to follow Jesus in the New Testament. And so what I want to talk about today is some of the fears that we may have that hold us back from walking further in our faith. Because I think that there are a lot of different things that prevent us maybe from being following Christ, but fear, I think, is a legitimate, serious one. And sometimes, like, depending on what season of your faith that you may be in, there are times where you're just content staying where you are. And I would argue that if you look at Scripture, even though you might struggle with those seasons, and we might be in those seasons for a period of time because it's natural, the idea is obviously to progress, to move forward, to be sanctified, to follow Jesus harder and yearn for him, etc. But we could be just content, just to be like, well, this is my faith, this is where I am, etc. And the other thing is, I think that there are times in our lives where, we want God to do something for us because we don't feel like he's done enough for us in a particular season, and we're almost like waiting for him, give me a reason to follow you because I've been doing all this other stuff, and it doesn't seem to be panning out the way that I expected it to when I was following you. And of course, we would never communicate that verbally because that's like kind of outside the boundaries of what Christians are supposed to do. But there are legitimate feelings that we have inside of us that we have to struggle with. And so I think there are a couple of different ways that we handle fear in our lives. And one way we do that is to manage it. We just kind of have it there sitting in our spirit. We kind of manage around it. And ultimately our lives kind of form around it. We don't even realize it, but we try to keep the things that we are fearful of at bay the best that we can, even if it isn't successful. And I think another way that we do that is, a more positive way that I think the scriptures call us to is that I think we see throughout the New Testament that God wants to break the chains of our fear in our lives. That, the scriptures say that perfect love drives out that fear. And the reality is that the more that we follow Jesus, the more that he's pushing us back from the things that we're afraid of and calling us to risk on his behalf. And I want to kind of go through 3 predominant fears that we may have in our faith, and then kind of talk about how we struggle through those things. And what I want to say about these common fears is that they're actually like legitimate fears that we have, that we struggle with. And the reason we know they're legitimate is because we use them to justify why we're not growing in our faith. Because when something has some legitimacy to it, we feel like it might have some ground and some reason behind it. So these are things that we struggle with and things that are common in our faith. Number 1, I will never get what I really want if I choose to follow Jesus. I'll never get what I really want. And I think that's something that, when you've been walking with Christ for a period of time, you realize that there are things that you have to sacrifice. That the more you follow Jesus, that there are things that you sacrifice as a result of that following. But it can easily change into something that we feel like I'm never going to get the full desires of my heart or what I really want if I choose to follow Jesus more intentionally. And really what it comes down to, and the fear aspect of that, is that we have to determine, for Jesus, is it somebody that we want to be associated with in our life? Is he like somebody that we just want to have the association with him and the name and Christianity? Or is he something that we really want to follow? Because I would argue that when you look at the New Testament, what you begin to see is that your wants and your desires change as you follow God on a deeper level. And so the core thing that drove Paul is that he wanted to know Christ more than anything else. That's what he really wanted. So those other things that he wanted changed along with that. Another common fear that we have is if I follow God, he will take away the things that I really enjoy. Like it's almost like like if I do this, I'm never going to really be able to do this, and this. And obviously, again, there's some legitimacy to that feeling because there are things that you wind up being sifted away from your life the more you follow Jesus, because there are things that you begin to realize either have no purpose or have no meaning or don't have the same value that you had put into them before. But those are things that we have to risk sometimes, that we are fearful that we're going to have to do, and it may hold us back from following and engaging God on a deeper level. The other thing is that God will require me to do something out of my comfort zone. And that's a huge fear that prevents us from doing a lot of different things. It prevents us from going out and reaching out and loving the people that God calls us to love. Like, you want me to associate with those people? You want me to go into those dangerous parts of my neighborhood? You want me to risk and follow Jesus and love these people that are really difficult to love? And ultimately it came down, one of the questions that was presented, I thought was an excellent question in one of our small groups discussion, is what does love require of me? Like when we begin to ask that question in our faith, it really defines our faith. It says, in this situation with this person, with these group of people, with where my life is at in my family, what does love require of me? And it makes things a lot, I think, clearer in a sense, but also makes it more, it creates more of a struggle. Because it challenges us to look at things through the lens of love and saying, what am I required to do in this situation? And it does push us outside of that comfort zone. So I want to look at Mark chapter 5 today. And in Mark chapter 5, there's a story here that I think has multiple layers of a spirit of fear to people that are reacting to this man. So there's a demon-possessed man. And that alone, a demon-possessed man in a community, is going to create some fear, some turmoil, etc. And this is what happens when it's occurring. In Mark chapter 5, it says this: they went across the lake to the region of Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from the distance, he ran and fell on his feet in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to them, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." And then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirit came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. And as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him, and Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. So one of the first things that you see, how they react to this fear, this turmoil in the community, this man that's demon-possessed is out of control. How do you deal with that reality in your world, in that area? And the first thing they try to do is manage it. So they put him in chains. And obviously, when that doesn't work, they try to bind him more, and he breaks free of those, and he's out on the hillside, and he's cutting himself. So they try to manage the fear that they have by binding him with chains. And I think that when we look at our lives, when we manage our lives out of fear, ultimately fear is the one that's managing us. And I think that they were trying to put a temporary solution on a deeper problem by binding this demon. What really needed to happen was, obviously, what Jesus did, to drive that demon out of them. But they were trying to rectify it and come up with a solution to manage it. And so often, that's what we do in our lives with the fears that grip us, is that if we could just keep it at bay, if we could just keep it manageable, then we think that we're not scared of it. We're not scared of the reality anymore. But the reality is that it's still in the surface, that we're actually being the ones bound by that fear. And some of the ways that happens is avoidance. Like that person that really pushes your buttons, or that person that drains you, you just kind of avoid them. You see them coming and you kind of get busy doing something else. And you know what you're doing. And you're avoiding that reality because there's something about that reality that you don't want to face. There's a fear, there's a frustration factor that's going on. And yet that reality, and especially if it's something that's continuous in your life, a person that you're continuing to minister to, etc., that reality is not going to go away by you just avoiding it. It happens in marriages all the time. We avoid certain topics because we know that topic is going to bring up those frustrations. It doesn't change the fact that those frustrations are still under the surface, though. We're just not talking about them. And so the other way that we try to manage our fear is we sever off some of those relationships that we're in. So, for instance, maybe just as an example, a family dynamic you may have, maybe there's somebody in your family that's really hurt you and wounded you, so you've decided that you're going to protect yourself from them ever hurting you again, so you sever off any contact with them. And you think that manages the wound that's inside of you and it solves it, but it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is because you think that you're protecting yourself from future pain, but you're still living in that old wound because you're protecting yourself from future pain. And so you're never living outside of that wound because you're just continuing to live in that wound by protecting yourself from that. The other thing that you see in this story is they kind of isolate the man. They isolate the problem and to deal with it. So he's out somewhere else in the hills. They can't bind him. He's out there. He's isolated. And we actually do that with our fear as well. Fear controls us by isolating us from living a life in a way that enters into the vulnerability of transformation. One of the ways and we are really good at doing this in the Christian community. We isolate ourselves from problems. We don't face them, but we don't go into them. We don't allow the tension to exist in our communities and struggle with them. And so it's the reality that we isolate ourselves. If we can create a culture that doesn't have to deal with sin and evil and problems in the world, then we can protect ourselves from that. And we do that in religious circles, but we also do that individually as well. The way that we do that is, again, that idea of avoidance. We avoid what's scary, We avoid that pain. So we isolate ourselves from people in our lives. Because we say, I've always just been hurt by people, so if I'm conservative enough and I protect myself and I isolate myself, I'll never get hurt again. And the reality is that you're still living in that hurt, and you will get hurt again no matter what, because life is messy and it happens. So then, what happens when Jesus comes onto the scene? He solves the problem, right? He solves the problem. He drives the demon out into the pigs and over the cliff. And people still want him to leave because they're scared of what just happened. Like, how do you explain that rationally? How do you explain this reality? And they're like, I don't know, I wonder what's going on in the minds and the hearts of the people there. Like, what's a bigger problem? Like, this guy's coming in and he's driving out this demon, and there's pigs are killed, etc. And they're like, what do I do in this situation? And the man also wants to follow Jesus because of what has happened. So they want Jesus to leave. They want the man to leave because they probably can't even believe that he is healed. And they're probably not for certain that he's completely healed, right? So they're playing it safe. And fear plays it safe within the walls of consumer Christianity, preventing us from being salt and light to the world. Like, if we're fearful, if we try to protect ourselves from everything, we're not living out that faith at all. We're not. And the reality is that we get into these situations where we can even invent fears that aren't reality. I mean, for instance, when I go on break in the break room, there's always like 1 or 2 cable news stations on. And the last month, you would have thought like everybody was affected by Ebola, right? I mean, you would think that Ebola was an imminent threat to the United States. And there was like, what, 1 or 2 like documented cases of that even occurring and it was solved. But you would think that it was like this biggest thing that we should all be afraid of, right? And that's the 2 things I think that can really grow a society and change people's minds in a negative way is fear. If you can get afraid about the right things, you can spend your money on it, you can spend your time. And so it is in churches. There are huge churches that are grown on the level of fear. I mean, you can grow anything on the level of fear. Because it doesn't call you to risk anything at all. It doesn't. And so what we're seeing here is, in this scenario, they want Jesus to leave, and this man wants to leave, and he's experiencing fear that we'll get into in a moment. But here's, I think, the danger of living in fear, is that we can spend so much time on what we want God to do for us and how we want God to protect us, that we are missing and we're not seeing what God is doing through us when we're helping other people. And, he transforms us when we take those risks, when we go out into the world and do those things. He transforms us when that would happen. And what this man comes to Jesus, he's getting into the boat, and he's like, I want to come with you, Jesus. Probably because he's like amazed that Jesus healed him, number 1. That's probably one of the reasons. But number 2 is he knows that like he's living in a town that is still afraid of him. That's probably not fully convinced that he's healed. So if he stays in that town that's afraid of him, he's going to have to deal with the repercussions of that. And so he goes, and Jesus says, no, you need to go back to your neighborhood and tell people what just happened. And I'm thinking to myself, this man's like, are you crazy, Jesus? Did you see they're driving you out for healing? This man, are you crazy? Like, what's going to happen to me if I stay here? I mean, my life is probably in danger at that point. I don't know how these people are going to react. And Jesus says, I'm not interested in collecting people that I've healed. I'm interested in healing other people through the people that I've healed. And so, here's the thing. God is not asking you to sell him to other people. He's asking you to tell the story he is writing for you. All Jesus wanted this man to do was just to tell the story of what happened to him. That's all he wanted to do. And what I find interesting about this story, it says the man went away, right? And the story doesn't end there. Like, he didn't just leave and just survive and go. He went and he began to tell the people of what happened. He could have just gone and said, okay, well, Jesus doesn't want me to come. I'm so glad he healed me. I'll find like a bunker and protect myself, and I'll just live my life the way I want to. Maybe move out of the neighborhood, go somewhere else, go to some place that's safer. No, he followed Jesus' words and he went and told his story. And that's what I think it comes down to. So I want to ask a couple different questions for us to ponder as we leave. What are you afraid to give up in order to gain that freedom? We all have fears. I mean, all of us in this room sitting here have fears. And a lot of those fears are really legitimate, and they're based on things that probably have happened to you. Maybe you've been hurt by certain things that you're protecting yourself with. And so often we can compare ourselves to you look at the saints in the church, and it's like, how did they go out and do those things and risk their lives and go into different countries and go into neighborhoods that they're doing? And you're like, how did they do that? And there's a risk to think that somehow they're holier than anybody else, that they're closer to Jesus because of that. I actually think what enabled them to do it was freedom. That they experienced the gospel so deeply that they by that, and the only thing that can free us from the fears that we have is Jesus driving them out of us. And so the other question is, what are you avoiding in an attempt to manage your fear of vulnerability? What situations are you trying to run away from that are so difficult in your life that you don't want to face? What is God calling you not to be afraid of so that you can grow? And those questions are the questions that are fearful in and of themselves because they cause us to think and reflect and change. But I think at the end of the day, when we look at the New Testament, we see a group of people that were so radically changed by the cross and the resurrection and Jesus' ministry here on earth that they said, I want to be disciples that I've experienced the freedom, what Jesus has done to me. I'm going to go out in those areas that call me to risk, in those relationships, in my families, etc. I'm going to go into those situations and live out that freedom. Because what happens is that fear prevents us from considering new information in our lives. And what Jesus is calling us to is to open our hearts and our minds to what the Spirit is doing and breaking us free from this morning. Let's pray. God, fear can grip us, and it doesn't have to be like, terrifying fear. And most of us, in our adult lives, it's just this nagging, stressful reality that we wouldn't even probably identify as fear. We wouldn't even call it fear. But the reality is that it's there and it sells well to us in our hearts because there's something within us that, we want to protect ourselves from things that are going to hurt us and wound us and cause us, just cause us stress. We want to live a life that, we're drawn to comfort, we're drawn to being to a happy life, etc. But God, we know that's not the nature of life. We know that what this story is all about is being transformed. And we thank you so much that you didn't avoid, that you didn't allow the human fears that you've experienced from coming to earth and living amongst us. You didn't allow those things to change your course. That you went and you faced the cross and you resurrected to give us new life. And so this morning, God, Holy Spirit, just open our hearts. We can be so deceived. We can deceive ourselves so much. We can think we're okay. We can think that we've managed those fears and that those fears we can even convince ourselves those fears are healthy. They protected us over the years. God, show us what we're missing because it's so hard to see what we're missing. So reveal those things to us. Use people in our lives to show those things to us. And give us the wisdom and discernment to know what to do when we find them. We pray this in Jesus' name.
Could I let go of all that you've given? If it meant that it all would be yours, could I sit at your feet and forget about me and remember what I'm here for? 'Cause honestly, I need to be broken. And honestly, I need to fall down. Go ahead and shake my foundation. 'Cause honestly, I'm figuring out that of all that I have, and all that I need is you. Honestly. If I leave behind all that's familiar, could I do what has never been done? If I believed in you like you believed in me, would you finish the work you begun? 'Cause honestly, I need to be broken. Honestly, I need to fall down. Go ahead and shake my foundation. 'Cause honestly, I'm figuring out that of all that I have, all that I need is you. Honestly. honestly, I'm figuring out that of all that I have, and all that I need is you. Honestly. Y'all can stand for this last two songs if y'all want. There's a peace I've come to know, though my heart and flesh may fail. There's an anchor for my soul. I can say it is well. Jesus has overcome, and the grave is overwhelmed. Victory is won. He is risen from the dead, and I will rise when He calls my name. No more sorrow, no more pain. I will rise on eagle's wings before my God, fall on my knees and cry. I will rise. There's a day that's drawing near, when this darkness breaks to light, and the shadows disappear. My pain shall leave my eyes. Jesus has overcome, and the grave is overwhelmed. Victory is won. He is risen from the dead. lot of us struggle with. A lot of us deal with on a day-to-day basis and are scared to take steps forward because we're scared. We got, you know, you're bigger than that. And it's hard to see you when we're going through those fears, God. It's hard to see what you're trying to do. But I guess that's why you tell us to believe and have faith. And God, I pray for our faith today, Lord. I pray that although the road ahead of us may seem scary, God, may seem like there's just a deep pit to drop in, God, but I pray that we just keep our head up, look to you, and walk by faith, God, and just move. So God, give us clear minds to walk in our fears. Give us clear minds to take these steps forward and trust you. And Lord, stay by our side.